Hello, everyone. Eric Hörst here. The Café is open for business. This is our once or twice a month meeting where I get to talk to you live and you get to ask the coach a question if you have one. Before we get there, of course, we start off each episode with coffee. After all, it is the Training Café. And so climbers around the world unite. Let's sip our coffee together. Nothing better than a fresh cup of coffee for breakfast or lunch. Not for dinner, but 2 out of 3 meals a day. I enjoy my coffee for sure. Something else we do each episode is a shout out. And this shout out is for Seb Bowen, who is on a tear at Flat Anger. I'm sure you've heard a couple of weeks ago, he put up maybe the longest, hardest sport route in the world at something like 130 or 140 meters long and 515 C. Just some crazy full-on route out the Flat Anger cave, a cave where most routes just climb partway. And he put some crazy long link. The guy is obviously got monstrous aerobic capacity that he's developed from all of his route climbing in recent years. And, you know, capacity is something you can't build overnight. You need to climb a lot of routes for lots of months and years to develop all the physiological traits, high mitochondria content and efficiency and the capillary density and the aerobic enzymes, like a marathon runner, you know, running huge miles week over week, virtually year round. That's what a route climber like this needs to do. You just can't put on the rope now and then. You need to be climbing hundreds of feet, hundreds of meters of rock a few days a week to develop that kind of aerobic capacity. And you know, anybody not doing that is not going to, you know, develop that kind of extreme aerobic capacity. And of course, there's a genetic element in that type of performance as well. You know, the best marathon runners or swimmers or rowers who have these crazy VO2 maxes, obviously there's a genetic predisposition that they have found and been able to leverage through appropriate training. So genetics alone won't get you up a climb or you know, any athletic achievement, but when you have the genetics coupled with a disciplined, intelligent training program and not getting injured, which is, you know, a common thing in sports. You know, the best athletes are the ones who seem to be able to be resistant to injury. And so I guess that would be Seb at this point. So, and I saw on 8a.nu this morning, I guess he just did the full change route, 8B plus, which might be the third ascent of that route. Of course, Adam Adra put it up a number of years ago, and then Stefano Gastolfi repeated it a few years ago. And so I think this might be the third ascent of that 15C, 9B plus. And so Seb has clearly moved up into what I would consider one of the top 3 route climbers in the world. And actually, as of today, he might be the best in terms of the recent track record. Though, of course, Adam Adra and Alex Megos and Jakob Schubert, and we could name quite a few others, are at the top of that list as well. So exciting stuff to see those types of achievements, something that only Coach Hörst can dream about at this point in my life. In terms of a little bit of a drill down topic today, you know, from my promotion of this Training Cafe, I wanted to talk a bit about post-road trip training. You know, I've just returned from several weeks on the road. I know many climbers save up vacation time and focus their year around a trip to a destination. Maybe abroad, maybe in your home country. If you get out for a week or weeks or a month or months, if you're lucky, you know, that can be, you know, an incredible thing, you know, that, you know, is kind of the highlight of your climbing year. But you've trained for that trip, you've gone on that trip, hopefully you've sent some great routes and projects. You return home, what do you do? And I guess it really depends on a number of things. If you return home with an ache or pain or a tweak or an injury, maybe a finger problem or a touch of tendonitis somewhere, well, then the prudent thing, of course, is to take a little time off and shift into rehab mode. You don't want to shut it down. That's never a good thing for an athlete, to just take a month off and do nothing. First of all, it's not good for healing wounds, for healing soft tissue injuries, which need a signal of loading to turn on the tenocytes and give them information on how to put down collagen and properly align it. A lot of chronic injuries result from people who get injured and they stop all training. They do no rehab, they do no loading, and so the collagen is trying to heal, but it's being laid down haphazardly and not lined longitudinally to the force. And without loading, it doesn't have a signal to know. These tenocytes have something called an integrin, which is actually a little sensor of force. And so when you give it daily loading, that integrin aligns the tenocytes to extrude collagen and give you proper alignment and good healing. And so that's why it is so important. Most injuries, you want to return to some appropriate loading as soon as you can. Obviously, if there's an acute phase, a few days where there's inflammation, swelling, injury to the, a wound of some type, there may be the need to have a few days or a week, perhaps more in some cases where you can't do much loading and you have to kind of let the healing get started and the inflammation to suppress. But, most minor injuries, you can right away begin to do some appropriate loading, rehab type loading, not trying to climb through the injury, with full loading, because that will oftentimes make matters worse. So you get home from a trip, aches and pains, deal with those first. Maybe if you're just, maybe if your body's healthy, but your mind is fatigued, which can happen from a long road trip, maybe you need a couple of weeks where you're not just going right back into hard training, but you're just going to kind of do some maintenance, some foam rolling and stretching daily, maybe some running or biking or walking, cardiovascular activity to burn calories and just, get your heart rate up once a day, which is always a good thing. I'm a big believer in kind of that idea that you need to get your heart and your breathing up every single day, one way or another. That is a good thing, but maybe not dive right back into that hardcore training program for a couple of weeks till you kind of get mentally fresh and motivated and have had some time to ponder your future goals. That might be the case. In my case, let me just speak to that. I was on the road off and on, doing some work, but also a fair amount of climbing for a couple of months. And so I got home and, did kind of need to play catch up on some things here at home and, kind of recover from the travel. But, a motivated climber bounces back from that fast, and I'm still a motivated climber. And so I think it was like my third day home that I was back down in the gym. And actually, my first serious workout when I got back was actually a test. I because I'm a coach and I have been training myself for decades and I collect a lot of data. I have written records going back many, many years. And one thing I'm always curious about is when I get home from a trip, where's my fitness at? Oftentimes, if you're on a long climbing trip, you develop a lot of stamina. Your climbing endurance can be quite good, maybe at a peak, towards the end of a trip. But your strength and power will be down because, in my case, I really didn't do a hangboard workout or a campus workout or anything really powerful. I didn't do any bouldering on my trip really because I was out sport climbing. And so it makes sense. I come back after a long trip and my strength and power are going to be reduced. And so I always like to kind of get some benchmarks, for where I'm at returning from a trip. And this time around, I was pretty pleased. When I do my max hangs, which I do on a 14 millimeter edge typically, an Ava Lopez 14 millimeter edge, which is quite sharp and grippy. When I left for the trip, was able to do three 7-second hangs with 90 pounds added to my body. Now I weigh 160, so adding 90 pounds is a total load of 250 pounds. So that's a lot of weight. I've been training many years, so that's kind of where I was at when I left for the trip, in very good shape. Coming home from the trip, I was surprised to see I'd only lost 10 pounds off that max. I was able to do that 14 millimeter hang 3 times for 7 seconds with about 80 pounds added to my harness. So only a 10-pound loss in max strength made me feel pretty good, because now I can start my next training cycle, which will be about 6 weeks before I get into my fall climbing season, which here where I live in the eastern United States, I look at October, November as kind of being that sweet spot where I want to try to get out and climb my best. And so I'm now going to shift into a bit of a training mode for the rest of August and into part of September to prepare as best as I can and to recapture that max strength. At my age, it's really tough to get much beyond where I'm at. In fact, the clock of aging is ticking, and at some point I'm not going to be able to maintain that my strength levels because of aging factors and your body changing. And so I look at if I can regain my 1 rep max on an exercise, or that 90-pound load on a fingerboard hang. If I can regain that, that's like as good as taking it to the next level if you're a younger climber. That's kind of the mindset you have to embrace as you're a 50-something climber. So for you returning from a road trip, those are all things to consider. Are you injured? Do you need some mental time off? Do you know what your goals are ahead of you the next 3 to 6 months, and how can you transition back into a training program to set you up for success the next time you're able to go out climbing for performance. And so hopefully that was some useful insight for you. We're now about 15 minutes into the Training Cafe, and so I'm going to now transition into answering some of your training questions, and I see a few of them are typed in already. If you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube Live, you can enter a question in now. I appreciate oftentimes, when viewers will type in where they're writing from. Just give me that tiny bit of background information. That's fun to see kind of the global audience of the Training Cafe. And, over the years, I've learned one way or another that my Training for Climbing book has spread to more than 50 countries. And so that's a really exciting thing. There's a half a dozen or so foreign translations, but the English version has seemingly made it everywhere that there are climbers in the world. And so that's a pretty amazing thing to have that influence, and for us to be able to talk about training for climbing on a global scale through this Training Cafe. So let's get to the first question, which actually is from Poland. How to train finger strength on a hangboard at home if I'm getting warmed up really slow. He says, usually I get my full strength after an hour of bouldering. Yeah, that is not uncommon. That's definitely how I am. When I go down and start to do a workout, whether it's a bouldering workout, a tread wall, or just hangboard training, I feel so weak starting off, especially after having 2 or 3 rest days. To get the nervous system turned on takes time. Now, younger folks can get it turned on more quickly. I think people like my sons can probably walk down into the climbing gym or go into a climbing gym and in a matter of 15 or 20 minutes have full strength and power and get it turned on through kind of a quick progressive warm-up. As you get older, that progressive warm-up needs to be very slow and deliberate. And the way I go about it is I start off with body weight exercises like pull-ups and some body weight hangs on bigger holds. I do some wrist roll things, to kind of get a little bit of a forearm pump going, just a light pump, get the blood circulating. And, you want to get your joints lubricated, so doing some dynamic stretching, doing, some external rotation, some Y's, I's, and T's with like a sling trainer. Think about your warm-up as not being just turning on the nervous system, though that is most relevant to your strength, but you want to get, your joints lubricated, the synovial fluid moving, especially in your fingers, but also your shoulders and elbows. And, you want to have that dynamic warm-up where you're doing range of motion activities with very light load to start, and then gradually more progressive load. And so for me, I do a variety of pull-ups, different grip positions. I eventually start to add some weight on, like a 20-pound weight belt, and do 10 pull-ups. And then I put on 50 pounds and do 5 pull-ups. I'll do some body weight hangs, then eventually I'll do some weighted hangs. Again, not as targeted training, but just to get turned on, to get the nervous system turned on. And so for me, like you, it's an hour process. And so it takes some trial and error to find out what works best for you. If you rush too quickly into doing max hangs with high loads or small edges, you risk injury. There's research that shows you need 100 loading cycles on your fingers to get kind of the connective tissues warmed up. And when your pulleys have been warmed up and lubricated, they're more flexible and pliable and less likely to snap and rupture. And so you don't want to rush that process. You need to kind of think about, how am I getting those 100 finger flexes or hangs. Doing some bouldering on a home wall or at the gym on big holds is a good step, obviously. And then over time, the holds get smaller, or maybe you add a little bit of weight on your body. And so, everybody's workouts are a little different and the time constraints are a bit different. But again, I think to kind of sum things up, to get warmed up, begin with body weight and big holds, then body weight on a little smaller holds, then a little bit of added weight on big holds, pull-ups, and a few hangs, and then eventually some weight on a bit smaller holds that is leading you into getting fully turned on, at which point you would then do either your main bouldering session for an hour, or system walling for an hour, or going into some dedicated hangboarding. And so I think 30 minutes to an hour is what it's going to take for most people. Shorter end of that for younger climbers, the longer end of that for older climbers. Okay, on to the next question. Michael, the vegan climber, says, "Hey coach, what is the best way to heal a split tip? I've had one that keeps reopening over the past few weeks." Yeah, well, of course, the short-term strategy that many climbers use is super glue, to kind of get it to seal closed and then tape over it, or actually super glue tape on. That's if you want to get through a session with that split tip. In terms of healing it, I think you want to have it cleaned out well. You might, if it's kind of a deep gash and you have access to some peroxide, to sterilize the wound, that is good because, we're climbing, especially if you're outdoors or you're grinding chalk and dirt into it, you want to get it cleaned out to reduce infection risk. That will help heal more quickly. And then antibiotic ointment. There's a number of types here in the United States. Neosporin is one that is commonly used by climbers, and you apply the antibiotic onto your tip and then put a Band-Aid or a little piece of gauze and tape to hold that on, so that it, in the first 2 days, let's say, of healing, that it's kept moist and that antibiotic ointment has been shown to help speed healing versus not having antibiotic ointment on it. Especially when you're sleeping, you want it on, but I think the first day or two, it's helpful to have it on more or less 24/7. Maybe when you take it off, when you shower, if there's some dead skin, some of that kind of white, moist, but totally not living skin, clip it off with the nail clippers. You want to get the debris, the dead skin, but obviously not do anything to wake up the wound or have it return to being fresh or bloody. So you have to be kind of gentle, but again, with experience, you'll learn to kind of doctor your tips a little bit, and the antibiotic cream seems to be the real wild card for many climbers. After about 2 days, when the wound is closed, then you kind of want to remove that moisture from the equation, and as it's healing, use sandpaper to kind of smooth off the scarring, whatever dead skin is on the surface. You want to remove that because that will allow the cells, the living cells underneath, to regenerate. And so removing on, say, late day 2, day 3, day 4, beginning to sand and remove some of the dead skin as it's healing also helps encourage the skin to renew itself. And having enough protein in your diet, especially as a vegan, want to make sure you're not shortchanging yourself in protein, because that slows not only muscle healing and recovery, but connective tissue and skin healing requires protein in your diet. And so I would make sure you're getting 100 grams of protein one way or another. Okay, next question. Let's see here. Okay, Aiko says, I took 3 weeks off for recovery because my injured finger synovitis. Do you think that is too much? Well, it depends. I mean, these finger injuries, it's tough to know exactly the extent of the injury. There's different grades of injuries, from just, a slight tenosynovius, which it sounds like you have, which is like an inflammation of the sheath that the flexor tendons go through, to a minor pulley tear, might be grade 2, more severe could be grade 3, or a complete rupture where you're going to be out of climbing for months in that scenario. But still, you can't just stop all training. You need to shift into rehab, appropriate rehab mode. And if it's a significant, partial or complete pulley tear, you want to actually have a splint, a pulley splint. If you Google pulley splint, for finger climber, you'll find both in Europe and North America, there are pulley splits you can buy and install that help hold the flexor tendon into the bone and allow the torn pulley flaps to come together and begin healing properly. And so you would wear that splint for several weeks, and it really does accelerate healing. Of course, again, you need to have some loading, but not too much loading. And by having the splint on and that holding the flexor tendon closer to the bone, it allows the A2 pulley flaps, or if it's another pulley, A3, A4 flaps, to come together and not be kind of re-injured as they're trying to heal back together. And so in a more severe injury, that pulley splint is highly recommended. But something like what you're describing, a few weeks off could be enough to let it become pain-free. And while I wouldn't recommend a lot of loading in your case, I think doing some loading, maybe just standing with some weights on your side that you can hold like an isometric contraction on, 5 or 10 pounds, lightly loading, giving that signal that I talked about earlier so that the collagen is being properly aligned. Total rest of the fingers is really not something you want to do. And so, but that being said, you also don't want to just ignore your injury and keep grabbing small holds and feeling the pain and knowing that you're making matters worse, not better. So there's a bit of advice. Again, it needs to be kind of on a case-by-case basis, which is where I always tell climbers that when in doubt, see a doctor or a physiotherapist who has experience with these things. They can do an ultrasound, a dynamic ultrasound, and actually see more specifically, in many cases, the nature of the injury, and therefore better prescribe the rehab program that you should be involved in. Okay, on to the next question here from DJ. He says, hey coach, I've done a dozen 512Bs, 6 12Cs, 1 12D. I'm trying to work on my first 13A. Do I have a big enough base to try a project at this level? It feels incredibly hard, but possible. I say yes. That's a pretty good pyramid. A dozen 12Bs, I really like that. The 6 12Cs, that's really good. Taking off another D would be nice. But while you're project shopping, for that 12D, you can also be project shopping for a 13A. A lot of times there's not a big difference between 12D and 13A. Or sometimes there's a world of difference. We all know how grades are. And so it really depends on the routes you have available, what climbing areas. I would say if you are going to look for a 13A, I would look for something that really caters to your strengths. Like if you're a strong boulderer, then you might look for a 13A that has a shorter crux that is maybe just a 10-foot boulder problem partway up a route that you can go up and work on and fall on a bolt and kind of treat it like you're solving a boulder problem. However, if you're more exclusively a route climber and you don't do a lot of bouldering, well, then you would be looking maybe for a 13A that is a little steeper with better holds, moves not so hard, but more of a test of endurance and climbing efficiency and speed and mastery. And a route like that could feel impossible when you first get on it because it's so pumpy, but with practice, with repetition, kind of like practicing, a routine or a drill, you get more efficient with every rep. Well, that's how route climbing often is. With each go, you're getting a little quicker, a little more intuitive. You're gripping a little less. You're feeling a little less fear and anxiety. And so what you're doing is each day that you invest into the route, you're getting a better miles per gallon. It's like your car getting better mileage. And your gas tank lasts longer. And so as you work routes and go through that process, you increase your fuel efficiency, and eventually you'll get to a point where you can make it to the chains without falling. And so my suggestion for you heading into the fall season is, see if you can shop for another 12D to add to the list, but definitely if you can find a 13A that kind of caters to your strengths, it would be good to start working on it. Not just focus singularly on it, but if it's an area nearby that you can travel to frequently, let's say on weekends, maybe you get on it on Saturday and give it a few goes and begin the learning process. But then on Sunday, go work on a 12D. Or, I think another thing that would be really good for you is to on-site 12A or 12B. Because if you're projecting 13A, you ought to be able to on-site one number grade below that. Learning to do 12A quickly really does make you a better climber. And I tell that to people pursuing 514 or trying to get deeper into the 14 grade. It's easy to get bogged down on just camping under your 514 project. And yeah, that's what it takes to send really hard routes. But there's also a place and a lot of benefit for having days where you go out and just climb 13A and do them quickly, on-site 13A. Do 13A or 13B second go and do a few of them in a day. And that type of mileage is not only, it's fun to send some easier routes, but that really does make you a better climber. At some point, just hanging on bolts on a 514 doesn't really make you a better climber. You might get better on that route, but are you really a better climber? I would say perhaps not. And so, the best climbers have quite a bit of diversity to how they spend their time at the crags. Okay, next question. Says, I've been climbing regularly for 2 years now, and my fingers have grown some calluses everywhere except the tips, which quite often cuts my session short. How can I make the tips more resilient? Yeah, well, if there was an easy answer to that, it would make a lot of climbers happy, but there is no easy answer. There's a lot of things at play here. How moist or dry your skin is has an influence of how your tips wear, whether it's indoors or outdoors. The weather conditions, the humidity, the temperature plays a role in how your skin wears. Obviously the nature of the rock, is it slippery limestone or is it coarse granite, affects how your tips wear. How sharp the holds are. And I mentioned earlier nutrition. If you're lacking protein in your diet, your skin is perhaps not quite as strong and doesn't regenerate as fast. And even how you moisturize your skin between days of climbing, plays a role. Maintenance of your skin, sandpapering it. You mentioned having calluses on your fingers everywhere but your tips. There's, as you're climbing, this signal for the skin to make more skin. And so where it's not getting worn down, you get these calluses that would be best to be sandpapered down. But similarly, your tips, even on your fingertips, there can be thin spots and then thicker spots. And so using a little bit of sandpaper very carefully and just kind of smoothing out those uneven parts of your fingertips can help the process along. Obviously, you don't want to be taking off skin where it's already thin, but if there's some thicker patches around it, smoothing that down and then regular moisturizing can help the tips wear better. There's, without a doubt, a genetic factor. Some people are more prone to having their skin wear out more quickly. But, also, like your body weight, if all other things being equal, if you're, have 20 extra pounds to hang on your fingertips, there's more, shear force. And as your fingers begin to slip, even on a microscopic level, or tear off of a hold completely, there's going to be more skin loss if you're a heavier climber than a smaller climber. So it shouldn't be surprising that, the heavier climbers, all of the things being equal, and they rarely are, but heavier climbers are going to have a little more skin wear on a given hold than a lighter climber. And so many factors there. I think for most climbers, it comes down to years of trial and error, using different things, learning how much to sand off, how often to sand off, knowing what type of moisturizer to use and how often, and then, choosing your days wisely. If it's a hot day where you're sweating and you feel like you're going to lose skin quickly, well, then just give that sharp boulder problem or route a couple of goes. Give it a couple really high quality goes, and that's it, rather than risk tearing skin and getting injured and being, messed up for a couple of days. Whereas if it's a cool, crisp day and you're able to climb in the shade and conditions are nice and you don't feel like you're slipping and greasing off of holds, well, then maybe you can give that same route a few more goes than you would on a warm day. So being aware of all of the factors that are coming into play should hopefully help you extend, the life of your skin. But again, like all things genetic, there are some set limits, so there is no secret to make your skin, say, last all day, other than not climbing, and so that's obviously not an option for us passionate climbers. Okay, well, I'm well over 30 minutes here, and if there's no additional questions to be typed in here, I will soon wrap things up here. But if you have a last-minute question, you're welcome to type it in. You know, I guess on that last question, one thing I'll add is, like, for me personally, skin wear is rarely a limiting issue. I mean, there's a few cases where I'll get a crack and on one of these, you know, like at the DIP joint here, and that could make climbing painful, but I can just kind of tape that crack and keep on going through my workout or my climbing. You know, the tip injuries are a little more, you know, difficult to deal with. Certainly there's some pros out there. We've seen the videos, Alex Megos and others that are able to climb really hard with tape over their wounded tip. Or maybe they wear tape over their tips on the warm-up goes, but then take the tape off on the send goes, and that way reduce wear and tear on the warm-up goes, on the boulder or route. You know, so there's a lot of different strategies out there, you know, that, you know, people learn to work around these problems. But, you know, there is that genetic factor. And again, with me, I have kind of dry skin that tends to be on the thicker side. And while cracking is an issue for me, my tip wear is rarely that problem. You know, for me, I'm not grabbing tiny holds, maybe as much as you might be. And as a route climber, it tends to be my muscles. You know, I just get fatigued, I get pumped out, or just lack the, you know, the strength, endurance to finish a route on a given day, and I have to kind of call it quits. And so it's usually not skin that ends my sessions, but you know, muscle tear or, you know, fear of injury. Like if I'm feeling my connective tissues, you know, have had enough for the day, I have learned to know when to say when. And perhaps, you know, that's an attitude you have to take with your skin wear as well. Okay, well, I guess that's it for this episode of Training Cafe. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to try to keep doing these every other Monday if I can. And we will meet at noon Eastern time, sip coffee together, talk training for climbing. Please do share about training for, you know, the Training Cafe with your friends. And you know, they can certainly view it after the fact on demand on the YouTube, our YouTube page, and also, you know, at trainingforclimbing.com. There's a whole resource there with articles, podcasts, you know, wide range of training tips dating back many, many years, and a lot of these training cafes going back. This is what, episode 64. So there's 63 where this came from, with a lot of information to go back and soak up. And so I invite you to do that as well. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, be safe, be strong, and climb on.